Isn't that him? As I began my shoulder press, I heard a whisper from behind me. Yeah, that's the guy. He is so jacked, right? Another voice said. I looked in the wall mirror, and the two girls stared at me while saying that. They turned away upon noticing me glancing at them. I looked at myself, and the boy inside me, who used to get bullied for being overweight, felt proud. These girls would never have noticed me if they had seen me a few years ago. It's better this way. Back then, when I had started breathing problems, my doctor said I was prone to develop even heart disease if I didn't lose weight soon, and I'm glad I did. I would have lost my life if I didn't choose a healthy lifestyle. I completed my sets and moved to the next exercise when a girl asked me for my number. At first, I pretended I didn't hear, but when she tapped on my shoulders, I had no choice but to turn around. Can I help you? I couldn't hide my frustration as I asked that. I was hoping to get your number, she asked in a low voice while trying to act cute. I'm sorry, but I have a girlfriend. After briefly responding, I returned my attention to my workout, using a reply I had frequently heard. After staring at me blankly, she turned and walked away. I spent 1.5 hours at the gym before leaving and returning to my apartment. I found walking to be more enjoyable than any transportation mode, plus it's excellent for boosting your metabolism. As I passed Target, I realized I needed to purchase a new pair of weightlifting gloves, as my current ones had worn out. I left my wallet at home today, so I considered returning later. It took almost 11 minutes for me to reach my place, only to find the landlord standing outside, rubbing her chin with her thumb and forefinger. I couldn't tell if she was waiting for me or thinking of reconstructing the building. Hello, Mrs. Janet, something bothering you? I greeted her the moment her gaze shifted to me. Her face would always light up after seeing me, which was good. It's just that I was thinking of selling the building, but I think the buyer is trying to rip me off, she said, as she scratched behind her ears. What about tenants, then? I had intended to relocate to a more prominent place since this one was a single-bedroom apartment, but I had not anticipated doing so this soon. I talked to others. They don't have a problem, and it will take a while. There is no way I would sell my property for half the price. She smiled, her face creased with wrinkles, before turning and walking away. After taking a shower, I went to bed for a light nap, but I couldn't sleep because of all the calls from the office. I swear, everyone remembers me at once whenever I'm trying to sleep or doing something urgent. Now that my sleep was over, I headed to Target to purchase a few items, including a new pair of gloves. While I loved walking, I avoided overexerting myself, so I took my car. Halfway there, I noticed a black sedan following me through the rearview mirror. Initially, I assumed it was a mere coincidence, and that the vehicle driver was likely heading in the same direction as I was. But when the car took all the same turns as me, I started getting chills. I sped up and somehow managed to outdistance it. I parked my car and entered Target, where many people were occupied with creating TikTok videos. Avoiding all those cameras, I got to the workout equipment section and found a pair of gloves for myself. And now that I was here, I started shopping for a few other things I needed at home. I completed my shopping in just half an hour, and after paying for everything, I headed to the parking lot. When I put everything in the back seat, I was startled to see the same black sedan, parked at 3 cars' distance. The engine was turned on, which meant someone was in there. I needed to return the shopping cart to the corral, but hesitated. Despite my fear, I gathered my courage and began pushing the cart. Suddenly, the car came speeding towards me as if the driver had lost control and nearly hit me. I ran in the opposite direction, leaving the cart. When it turned around to do it again, I realized that whoever was driving it was trying to kill me. I somehow managed to get inside my car and get away. Just when I thought I was out of trouble, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw it following me again. Why would someone do this? I couldn't think of anyone who would gain anything after killing me, neither family nor friends. None of them owned a black sedan either. So who was this person? Whatever the car, I was still terrified for my life. Not wanting to let them know my address, I continued to drive in circles, trying to shake the car off. My brain couldn't process clearly since I focused only on outrunning the driver. But then I realized what I would do once the fuel ran out, and I was reminded of the police. I dialed 911 and told them everything while asking for help. And it wasn't long before I was approached by 2 police cars. They asked me if I was okay, and when I talked to them, I noticed the car was no longer following me. After assuring me they would look for the vehicle and question the driver, I was instructed to go home. I safely got to my apartment without anyone following me, but I was still paranoid and looked around to see if someone was still there. Luckily, it never happened again after that, and I hope it never does. The police could never find the car, and since I never saw a number plate, I could not provide many details. But I am still trying to figure out who it was and why they were after me. But looking back at that incident, I get an eerie chill down my spine.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Whenever someone asks me if I want to go camping trips these days, the answer that always comes out of my mouth is straight no. I don't hate it. Instead, I used to love going around the wilderness and hiking for hours with my buddy Sam, and we used to camp in the weirdest places. Taking risks was always my motto, so whenever I got a chance with whoever was possible, I would just grab the opportunity, and going with Sam on our risky adventures tops all. But not anymore since I avoid going on trips. Not to avoid camping in particular, but the lakes are what I'm the most scared of. It was around the time when my Uncle Henry from Manchester was visiting with his family. He had 2 sons, Julian and Anthony. Both of them were younger. And while Julian only had a year difference from me, Anthony and I were 4 years apart. Despite our age differences, they seemed more experienced than me, judging by the way they were speaking. I was never the type to show off, but when I heard them boasting about their many conquests which paled in comparison to mine, I couldn't help but tell my escapades with hilltops, forests, and other dangerous places. How about taking us somewhere then? Uncle Henry joined in our conversation when he heard me telling about my last adventure with Sam. I hesitantly looked at him, scanning what looked like a man in his late 50s, which he took notice of as the corner of his lips formed a knowing smile. "Sure, where do you want to go?" I asked, not wanting to sound rude while looking away in embarrassment, as I had just gotten caught giving him a judging look. "I don't know. Why don't you boys choose the place and let us older men know later?" I could notice him emphasizing the word old intentionally as he walked away laughing with my father. Not knowing what to do in such a situation, I passed the choosing task to Julian and Anthony. I walked away to my room since I didn't want to get engaged in the conversation further, besides I had already a trip planned with Sam for the next month. And as there were only 15 days remaining for that, it didn't matter to me what plan they chose, because I was going to deny any trip if it would be more than 3 days. I was called to dinner by Mom a little earlier than usual that night, so I figured it must be because my uncle's family might have a habit of eating earlier unlike us, so weren't used to entering the dining area before 9 p.m. Anyway, so when we were in the middle of eating, the brothers brought up the camping trip again, while informing us that they had chosen the Great Smoky Mountains National Park as their destination. It seemed they put a little thought into choosing the place, so I agreed, looking at how it would be closer than other places as we lived in North Carolina. It got decided the trip would be for 2 days and 3 nights, and we would be heading there just the next morning to start the hike. Since my parents had work to do, they denied coming with us, so it was just going to be me, Uncle Henry, and his 2 sons. I gave them instructions on what to bring to the trip and how we were going to do it. I had a Z2X tent which would be perfect for 4 to 5 people, as Sam and I loved space, so I decided to take that with me. But still, I suggested they bring sleeping bags first thing in the morning if they would be uncomfortable sleeping together. The drive took almost an hour from our place, and we arrived around 11 in the morning since we left a bit later than planned. We started hiking to the foothill of the Great Smoky Mountains because of Douglas Lake, where we had decided to set up our camp. With the speed these 3 were walking, we got there at sunset, which was a bit disappointing as I had expected to arrive way earlier than this. A few other campers had already set up, taking the best spots, and campfires had started to light up the area. As we reached, my uncle and his 2 sons sat on the ground, looking a bit tired from walking and carrying all the stuff. One could easily tell by their heavy breathing that they were not used to the amount of walking they had done today. Anyway, I let them be and started talking out things to try and build the tent on my own. Looking at how I was doing all the hard handiwork, Uncle walked over to me and asked if he could help with anything. I pointed in the direction of my bag and asked him to take out a lighter to start a campfire. I was surprised to see that he had done a pretty good job at making the bonfire, which was beyond my expectation judging by his performance till now. When I was done setting up the camp, I felt the urge to take a dip into Douglas Lake as I had always done with Sam. I asked the brothers if they wanted to come along, but they denied, saying they were already too tired. Leaving them however they wanted to be, I charged into my trunk inside the tent and walked to Douglas Lake. Surprisingly, there wasn't anyone around at the time, which was unlikely because I had always seen a few people swimming around. I didn't think much of it and went inside the water to calm my nerves. Most of you might have experienced this feeling whenever alone in the dark area that suddenly starts to looking ghastly if you overthink about it. The same thing started happening to me as I was swimming in that lake, and I became hyper aware of my surroundings, which was frantic. I could hear the rustling sounds of the trees and the wind that was blowing at a slow pace, even the constant sound of crickets that was coming from a distance. I wasn't able to swim with a peace of mind anymore, so I decided to get back to the camp, and as I was swimming back to the shore, I felt something grabbing my foot. I turned around to see there was no one beside me in the lake, so I tried swimming further, but whatever had grabbed my foot prevented me from doing that. Thinking my foot might have gotten stuck or something, I tried to pull it, but I was met with another fright when I was pulled inside with a jolt. I somehow managed to keep my balance and prevented myself from drowning, but the same action was repeated and I was pulled back, this time a little deeper than before. My head went into the water, so I tried to move my hands around to see who was doing such a thing, but there was no one. My hands didn't touch anymore, nor could I see someone on the water's surface, which was even more frightening. I struggled to go up to inhale some oxygen, but whatever had grabbed onto me just kept taking me deeper and deeper. The air that had left started to cut off, and holding my breath felt impossible any longer. At this point, it felt as if the water itself had started to strangle me. My body slowly started to feel numb as I continued hitting the water to get some air, but all I could inhale was more and more water. The burning sensation started to get stronger as I felt the water entering my lungs, and I started to feel dizzy, and my vision started to feel spots on them. As I was possibly passing out, I felt a figure jumping in and coming in my direction, and then pulling me to the top. The grip that I was feeling on my leg until now had disappeared as I was taken to the surface. I was on the beach when I came to my senses, coughing up water as someone compressed my chest. I felt too weak to do anything when I heard the faint sound of my Uncle Henry saying something along the lines that I was going to be all right. I was taken back to the tent, and for the rest of the night, I had a burning fever. Despite being half unconscious, I could tell that someone kept changing the cloth on my forehead and nursing me throughout the night. Luckily, my fever had gone down the next morning. I felt better except for chest pain and restlessness still lingered. The regretful look on my uncle and cousin's face was saying that they were feeling guilty and blaming themselves for whatever happened to me, as they were the ones who suggested and pushed this trip in the first place. But I knew it could have happened either way. Doesn't matter who my companion was for the trip, so I honestly didn't blame them. But I never said anything either to clarify their guilt. The only thing I asked them was not to tell my parents about the incident. The trip was cut short, and we returned home the very next day. When getting asked by my parents, I gave them the excuse that I'd gotten a fever from dipping in the lake, removing the part of my almost death from drowning. Uncle and their sons returned to Manchester 2 days later. The very same day, I got a fever after getting a seizure, which resulted in pneumonia. It lasted 3 weeks, making my body to get extremely weak and causing a major weight loss. Besides getting seizures once in a while, I'm fine now. But I have developed an extreme fear of water, which gives me the feeling of getting strangled. I did tell Sam about everything, but we don't hang out anymore. There's one more thing that I was able to do after the day besides camping. I never got to thank Uncle Henry for saving my life and nursing me that night. I think I'm going to give him a call later today. Tell him how grateful I am that he helped me when he did. I was a manager at Target and had a horrible experience with the customer one time. I always found the situation very strange. For the most part, the customers are very pleasant and not at all bad in comparison. In some places, I've worked with the public my entire adult life, and people can be absolutely horrible sometimes. But they are a little bit better at Target. In the few years I've worked there, I never once had to call security or physically escort someone off the premises. I only once ever had to call the police on someone, and I would actually make the case that he was only a target to creep on girls. So I'm not even sure that that really counts, but anyway, I digress. My story with that guy was actually really interesting, and I feel a weird combination of anger and sympathy for this one kid. He must have been about 19 or 20 years old, really tall, one of the weirdest looking kids I've ever seen. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way or anything. He was just really strange looking. It probably made life for him really difficult, so I can at least understand where he was coming from when he did what he did. Absolutely does not justify it or anything, but I can understand him at least, if that makes sense. It all started on a usual afternoon. I had just gotten off the phone with corporate, and if you're wondering, yes, it's always a nightmare. I was looking forward to doing some inventory checks and whatnot for the day. The store had been awfully busy that week. I had a customer who wanted to speak with me. I went out to talk with her, and she told me about an employee who had been inappropriate with her. I guess one of our people was helping her decide on clothes and was standing a little too close to the dressing room door. Honestly, she struck me as a drama queen. I just kind of brushed it off and told her that we would look into it and make sure our employees don't do anything like that again. But when you're a manager, you hear complaints like that all the time, and a good chunk of them are just from people who want to get a free item or discount or something. I got another complaint that day from another customer. This one made me a little bit more intrigued. It was from someone who looked like she came from a wealthy home, probably not looking for a handout here. She said that one of the employees had felt her while she was looking at clothes. Now that set off some alarm bells, because that meant that one of my workers was physically creeping on customers on the job. I told her I would look into it, and I called the meeting before everyone went home. I explained the situation and said that whoever was responsible would come to my office and have a chat with me. I would go easy with them if they admitted to it without forcing me to look into it. My personal philosophy is that people know when they do wrong, and they just want an opportunity to right their wrongs. So I try to give it to them. But everyone went home. No one admitted anything. And that was when it was on. We couldn't look at the security camera footage in the area because all of this had been going down near the dressing rooms. The closest security camera we have is on the outside rack of the clothes, but it doesn't give us very much indication of what's going on near the dressing rooms. I asked one of my favorite employees to keep an eye on that area over there. He told me he would. 2 days went by, and he didn't see anything. I didn't get any more complaints either. Very strange. Of course, it wasn't long before we had another complaint. I asked the woman what this employee looked like. She forgot the name on the tag but told me it was a tall, skinny guy with weird-looking glasses. And right off the bat, I knew it wasn't anyone on my team. We didn't have a skinny guy with glasses. And immediately, I knew that we were dealing with someone that was pretending to be an employee. I gave a heads up to my team and had everyone on the lookout. I remember getting a text message from one of my female team members. She told me that she spotted someone that looked like that over by the clothing section. I immediately went over to look around, but before I did, I made sure to put on my jacket around my uniform. That way, I wouldn't be obvious that I was a manager looking to bust this guy. I spotted this kid, stood out like a sore thumb. At first, I was worried that it would be dealing with some middle-aged creep. I felt kind of bad when I realized that this was some high school college kid being a weirdo. He was wearing what looked like a Target uniform. If you look closely enough, you could tell it was fake, but I guess the average customer doesn't really know the difference. I walked over to him and asked to see him in my office. The look of terror on his face washed over him in that moment was unforgettable. He wasn't trying to run or anything, and I brought him in and sat him down. From what I could tell, he was an otherwise good kid. He was going to local community college, had good grades, went to church, the whole 9 yards. I asked him why he was doing this, and he said it was because no girls in his college would date him. I tried to explain to him that being a creep to strangers by impersonating a Target employee is not the answer. I told him that I could call the police and have them arrested for what he was doing. I told him I wouldn't though. I know having something like that on your record can really mess your life up, and I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, he hadn't done anything horribly bad in the store. He seemed like he got the memo. Well, he didn't though. Must have been 2 or 3 months later, and I got another report about something like that. Apparently, this woman was looking for a new sweater, and a Target employee kissed her on the cheek. My mind jumped to the only thing I could think of, and I called the police. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he had dug his own hole here. He was in the same area, doing the same thing as before. I don't know what happened to him after the fact, but what I can tell you is that one of the cops recognized him. I guess this wasn't the only time he was being a creep in a clothing store pretending to be an employee. But other than that one weird kid, people at Target are very okay people. When I was a child, my father always told me to stay away from the men in suits that stood by the local restaurant across the street. My father told me to stay an honest man and to never associate myself with those men. They were bad apples and people who would destroy lives of other innocent people. My father was an honest man who made an honest living. He owned a grocery store in Chinatown. Even though we lived in an Italian neighborhood, he had the store in Chinatown. He never wanted to be associated with anything the people in this neighborhood was doing. He always told me, look at the Chinese. They work hard and they try to be as honest as possible. You gotta be like them. You have to work hard. If you want things, you have to work for them. No doubt there. Work and be better. He always lectured me over hard work and things like that, and I always believed it. He once took me to the Chinatown on their New Year, and I was sure very impressed by everything they put on there. But as soon as I got back to my neighborhood, I couldn't help but shake the feeling of home. He might not have felt like home in our neighborhood, but I always did, and I was friends with everyone, and everyone were pretty great to me. It was a great neighborhood regardless of what my father believed. I was pretty much involved in my neighborhood and often had crossed paths with the guys in the suit. They were not as bad as father told them to be. They were pretty decent guys. Always spotted us $1 when we were playing nearby. We were having our game when one of the boys came in and spotted us $1 to go play at the 4th and corner. And then, when we were at the 4th and corner, we heard some shots that came from the old place where we used to play. And then we would just ignore the shots and kept moving. Things were not as plain as they thought they were. As a child, you are unaware of things like that, and you overlook all the things that are not according to the standards of a child. But then as you grow up and are on the verge of growing up, you realize that things are pretty different than we make them to be as a child. I grew up realizing those men to be the part of the mafia. That was enough for me to realize that things are not as simple as they look out to be. And turns out, my father was right about the whole thing, and being the honest man he was, I grew up to follow a similar path, but differently. I became the FBI officer and worked in the organized crime division, where it was me, and soon I was headed to become the in charge of taking care of the organized crime division, and it was something that I was very excited about. Because I grew up around these very characters that were now described away in my files, and it was something that excited me very much. I handled the Chinatown cases where the FBI agents and their families were kidnapped in order to charge the orders. The Huang family had power over the president, and my team and I pinned him decades later for that, was the very reason that I had the rep in the FBI. It was then that I was handed the case of Giovanni's. Their family had been running up the business in the neighborhood for way too long, but it was something that was personal to me, and all of the things that my father said about these men were true. And seeing the guys up and running all these businesses and pretending to be good in their suits was something that I ignored when I was a child, and it was meant to be like that. I saw their case file, and they were responsible for multiple murders, kidnappings, and thefts, and almost every crime by the book. And when I rounded up their case files, none of them exactly knew who their boss was. I decided to catch them in one of the biggest dealings, and in there, we apprehended them all, and even their boss. Upon further asking, the case was all cleared, and upon opening up their history, I found out that the family was started by my own grandfather, and my father inherited and stayed in there for a while. He was the head of the Giovanni's inside and out for almost 10 years, and when he walked away later, and that was something that I could not have ever imagined seeing, that my father always talked about the honest men job, and this was definitely not honest, and it broke me. But I had to do what had to be done. And then I rounded my father for further questions, and he was honest in the questions, but with the connection I had to be relieved of my duties. And that was the last time that I worked as the FBI agent. I was relieved until the call comes in. The call came in years later, 3 years, 2 months, and 19 days later.